If Burkina Faso is threatened by the West, will Russia defend it? Following a failed murder attempt on President Ibrahim Traoré, Russia has sent a large contingent of troops to Burkina Faso, upending the geopolitical landscape of West Africa. It is obvious that Russia would always support Burkina Faso. But why another attempt at assassination? Why is Russia prepared to provide protection? Let's investigate. We are all aware of the outside causes, and everyone is saying it, not just us. What then motivated the West or its allies to try to terminate Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso? The audacity to claim that our nations are impoverished. Each year, they steal trillions from Africa. What is the African doing furthermore? We simply give in like a conditioned, submissive black man. One may then wonder why African leaders have done little to address this appalling state of affairs. To date, 22 coups have been documented, where the commanders were terminated. The initial 7. They were slain after they made the decision to leave the CFA francs and start printing their own currency. African leaders have been terminated whenever they have attempted to act in the best interests of their nation. Let's get right to the subject and cut through the clutter. There is no doubt that the West or its partners had every reason to try to terminate Ibrahim Traoré. Traoré has become a symbol of defiance and a thorn in the side of Western powers that have long viewed Africa as their resource pit and geopolitical chessboard since taking office in 2022 following a popular uprising. There is much more to this than a single leader. This is about the West's last-ditch effort to maintain its eroding hold on a region that is flatly rejecting it. As Traoré became the public face of the new Burkina Faso government, it wasn't just another change of government. It was the beginning of a nightmare for the West. A young, vibrant African leader who was unreservedly anti-Western quickly expelled French troops, cut off Western influence, and severed relations with France, the former colonial power of Burkina Faso. That alone triggered concerns in London, Washington, and Paris. Once secured in their neocolonial arrangements, the French witnessed the disintegration of their power in West Africa. Furthermore, you can be certain that the conversations were not about diplomatic solutions behind closed doors. They focused on finding a long-term solution to this issue. It wasn't just talk, either. Traoré didn't mince words. He made a concerted effort to undermine the foundations of Western economic dominance in Africa. Through financial institutions, military installations, and purported aid, the West has established itself in Africa for decades, are intended to keep a solid but silent grip on the continent. Burkina Faso would no longer be a pawn in this game, as Traoré made apparent when he saw through this facade. He used more than words in his rhetoric. Then there was actual action. Establishing commercial partnerships, forging military agreements, and collaborating with Russia in order to directly challenge the West's monopoly in the area. The West's panic button was touched at this point. This is the crucial detail that ought to get everyone's attention. Traoré's increasing support for Russia. An African leader turning to Russia for assistance was what the West feared more than an African leader rejecting their authority. Why? Because Russia serves as a tactical offset to the dominance of the West. Furthermore, the West's long-standing dominance over Burkina Faso and possibly the entire region could be overthrown by an alliance between Burkina Faso and Moscow. The signing of important cooperation agreements between Russia and Burkina Faso coincided with the mysterious assassination attempt on Traoré. These accords weren't only token gestures. They included Russian troops, military assistance, and resources arriving to help Burkina Faso battle jihadists, a duty that French forces had not been able to do. The fact that Traoré closed these deals before this assassination attempt occurred is no accident. Because of leaders like Traoré who publicly questioned the West's economic and military hegemony, the West could not afford to allow Russia to expand its influence in Africa. Political figures and Western media can portray this as a domestic problem in Burkina Faso or as a component of the unpredictable instability that afflicts the Sahel. Don't be duped, though. The threat to Western interests posed by Traoré's survival is the true concern here. The murder was a calculated action, an effort to regain authority over an area that is quickly eroding from Western control. Why now, you ask? Why did Traoré's closer connections with Russia lead to this assassination attempt? The hand of the West was coerced. There was no way they could afford to wait. Traoré was gaining support from other African countries, solidifying his hold on power, and emerging as a symbol of opposition to the West. Africa as a whole is beginning to realize that Western aid is a hoax meant to keep people dependent, and this is reflected in the rising popularity of leaders like Traoré. Traoré became a target because leaders like him recognize this and take action. In addition, observe how Western pundits attempt to misrepresent Traoré's intentions by portraying him as an extremist or a disruptive force. They will claim that by refusing French assistance, he is causing anarchy in Burkina Faso. However, the truth is very different. By substituting real Russian military support with French inefficiency, Traoré's leadership is stabilizing the nation. To divert attention from the reality that their power is diminishing, the West needs this straw man. Since the reality that Traoré is moving closer to true independence would highlight their shortcomings, they must fabricate a story that paints him as reckless. The goal of the assassination attempt was to solve the issue with a swift surgical strike. It has grown into something bigger before. However, the West overlooked two important factors: the degree of Russian involvement and Burkina Faso's tenacity. The failure of the attempt on Traoré's life triggered a series of events for which the West was unprepared. In addition to failing, the plot inspired Russian backing. Russian authorities quickly made it apparent that there will be repercussions for any additional Western meddling in Burkina Faso. The quick deployment of Russian troops to bolster security near Traoré sent a clear message. Moscow would not tolerate the West's continued meddling in African affairs. This goes beyond a single failed assassination attempt. This has to do with the West's diminishing capacity to use murder and terror to control African countries. Every unsuccessful attempt to overthrow leaders such as Traoré just makes nations like Burkina Faso more determined to fight for independence. Additionally, each Russian soldier stationed in West Africa serves as a sobering reminder to the West that its era of unbridled power is drawing to a close. Now, the West finds itself in a vulnerable situation. Traoré's existence is evidence of the shifting balance of power in Africa. The more the West uses force to exert control over the situation, whether through conspiracies, economic sanctions, or assassinations, the more it drives African countries like Burkina Faso to align themselves with alternative powers like China and Russia. Traoré's failed attempt on his life serves as a metaphor for the West's larger inability to adjust to a world in which its authority is no longer assured. Perhaps it's time to acknowledge that they no longer possess the political or moral power to control events in Africa. The murder attempt on Traoré is merely another desperate move by a power structure that is aware that its time is running out as the Western period of superiority fades. The writing is on the wall, but the West may keep up its clandestine activities, economic hegemony, and deceitful strategies. Leaders like Traoré are at the front of Africa's transformation. This is the question the West ought to be asking itself. How long can they maintain the appearance of dominance until the continent as a whole rejects them completely? Undoubtedly, Traoré's assassination attempt was a desperate attempt to put an end to a movement that is expanding well beyond the boundaries of Burkina Faso. Traoré's survival in the face of overwhelming odds is more than just a personal triumph. Africa is victorious. It serves as a warning to the West as well. Your days of unbridled power are coming to an end. However, the question of why Russia is sending troops to Burkina Faso is now crucial. Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. It makes sense that two countries seeking freedom from the oppressive hold of Western rule would align. Let's be clear about this. Under the fearless leadership of Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso has made a decision that goes against decades of Western power manipulation, colonization, and exploitation. What about Russia? Russia stands ready to support a country that is defending its right to self-determination rather than intervening as a rescuer. They are working together to change the course of African sovereignty. The West would want to portray this collaboration as Russian involvement, but it is simply another cliched way to cover up its anxiety. In actuality, Burkina Faso is growing and making its own decisions. Western countries are alarmed by what Traoré has shown. A youthful African leader who has no qualms about cutting connections with his colonial background, and establish fresh connections founded on respect for one another and common interests. Furthermore, Burkina Faso didn't have to hunt far for allies who genuinely appreciate African sovereignty. Russia stood forward to cooperate rather than to dominate. Russia has more than just opportunistic interests in Burkina Faso. Let's instantly debunk that Western myth. This has nothing to do with the US and France's decades-long exploitation of African resources. Russia is participating as part of a collaboration that enables Burkina Faso to take advantage of its natural resources without any conditions. Rare earth minerals, gold and uranium are no longer only riches to be mined and exported to support Western economies. Burkina Faso is starting to manage these resources according to its own conditions under Traoré's direction and with Russia's assistance. When the West got its chance, it brought with it nothing but debt, dependence, and suffering. A new chapter has begun. Although Russia's military support is crucial, we must avoid making the mistake of thinking of this as just boots on the ground, as the West has done. This is a much deeper partnership. With cutting-edge military instruction, tactical assistance, and security infrastructure catered to Burkina Faso's particular difficulties, Russia is enabling the nation. In contrast, the French military presence served only to support a failing dictatorship and safeguard foreign interests for many years. In his insight, Traoré saw right through that sham. Russia did the same, giving Burkina Faso the means to protect its borders, defend itself, and preserve its independence without depending on the so-called peacekeepers, who have been anything but, is the goal here. Russia is here to offer, not to take from Burkina Faso. Yes, this partnership will benefit Russia, but not in the predatory way that Western initiatives have come to be associated with. Burkina Faso offers Russia the chance to fortify its ties with countries weary of Western dictates. Additionally, Russia is a partner that provides Burkina Faso with genuine economic cooperation and security support without the neocolonial baggage. This partnership, which is based on respect and common objectives, benefits both parties, and the West is genuinely frightened by it. The West will now use the word stability as though they are the only ones who can use it. Burkina Faso's move to Russia, according to the West, destabilizes the area. Let's be truthful. Who was the original cause of the instability? The West, especially France, has been meddling in West African affairs for decades, leaving a legacy of weak regimes, coups, and never-ending cycles of conflict. With Russia's help, Traoré is ending that pattern. Becoming a pawn in someone else's game does not lead to stability. It results from being able to protect your sovereignty, which is precisely what Burkina Faso is doing right now with Russia's assistance. Leading a larger push for a multipolar world is another reason for Russia's geopolitical interest in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is at the center of this shift, which is ending the days of a single world power making all the decisions. Africa can no longer be expected to conform to the West's antiquated imperialist vision. Burkina Faso is demonstrating the options available to African countries. Options that do not entail caving up to the World Bank, IMF, or any other Western financial organization that aims to keep nations mired in debt. Here, Russia's task is to assist Burkina Faso in achieving full sovereignty and escaping the burden of meddling from the West. Take a look at what Russia has done in the Central African Republic and Mali, among other African countries. Similar to Burkina Faso, these nations have been negatively impacted by Western manipulation. However, they have begun to regain their agency on the international scene with Russian assistance. Burkina Faso observes this, and the fact that it is on a similar trajectory is no accident. Terms are not being dictated by Russia. It's giving people the means to be independent, because it highlights their shortcomings and incapacity to actually assist African countries in becoming self-sufficient. The West despises this. The rest of Africa is also being sent a message by Russia's intervention in Burkina Faso. It lets the leaders of the continent know that they have choices. Moscow is providing real backing for African sovereignty, something the West has never done. And there's no denying that Burkina Faso is seizing this chance. Traoré is aware that the traditional methods of relying on Western powers only result in exploitation and stagnation. Burkina Faso is establishing itself as a leader in a new African order with Russia, one in which countries are allowed to choose their own paths without interference from the West. Therefore, the answer to the question of why Russia has invested in Burkina Faso is straightforward. Because Africa's future lies in Burkina Faso, led by Traoré. A future in which African countries take pride in their independence, refuse to be exploited by the West, and form alliances according to their own conditions. And by embracing this vision, Russia stands to acquire not just an ally but also a significant role in the change of a continent that is at last gaining its independence. Therefore, it is true that the West is afraid of the connections between Russia and Africa. However, what are the profound causes that nobody discusses? The West's desperate reaction to Russia's expanding power in Burkina Faso and throughout Africa betrays a dread that goes beyond straightforward geopolitical scheming. They have come to the understanding that their long-standing dominance over the continent is disintegrating more quickly than they anticipated. Western nations like the United States and France viewed Africa as their own hunting ground for many years, using military installations, economic strategies, and political bribes obtained behind closed doors to establish control. However, the West's house of cards is suddenly collapsing as Russia steps in and offers a different form of collaboration. Particularly, France is in shock about the profound changes in its former colonies. Let's be honest, France's purported peacekeeping efforts in countries like Burkina Faso and Mali were merely a flimsy attempt to hold control of important military bases and African resources. These nations had grown tired of the false sense of security that French troops offered for many years. In actuality, France's presence merely made matters more unstable and permitted the ongoing exploitation of Africa's riches for European gain. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré have led a recent wave of French troops to be expelled from West Africa. But this is more than just a change in policy. It's a critique of French hypocrisy spanning decades. The entrance of Russia only made the already open wound more visible. African countries are picking new partners who respect their sovereignty because they are tired of being missiled and manipulated. But the pressure isn't limited to France. Russia's growing influence in the area has equally alarmed the US. For many years, Washington has depended on the weak and reliant governments of Africa to protect its interests. Whether that meant gaining access to strategic resources, managing trade channels, or conducting military operations under the cover of counterinsurgency on African soil. Africa was never about partnership for the United States. It was about preserving a world empire in which African countries continue to play a supporting role. African countries are now eschewing Washington's aid packages with conditions and embracing alliances that enable them to stand on their own 2 feet, as Russia is providing real military and economic assistance. The fact that Russia operates under a different set of norms that the West finds difficult to control is what frightens the West. Russia is providing direct, no-nonsense agreements, security support, resource partnerships, and military cooperation, all without the typical Western conditionalities, while the West hides its meddling in the name of democracy and development. And that's exactly why Burkina Faso and other African countries are siding with Moscow. While the West still sees African countries as pawns in their global chess game, Russia is considering them as equals. There is more to the West's decline in power than just resource deals and military installations. It's about the story being lost. African countries are picking partners who respect their autonomy for the first time in a long time. Western powers have done all in their ability to keep Africa weak, dependent, and divided from coups to economic sanctions. But since it challenges this established system of control, Russia is presenting an alternative that worries the West. Russia is demonstrating to African countries that there is an alternative to the West's decades-long web of exploitation by offering economic and military assistance, a method that avoids ongoing submission to outside forces. Remember who the true meddler is in this situation. Africa's frontiers have been delineated by the West for millennia, pretended to be a kind entity while planning its coups and embezzling its riches. Russia's actions in Burkina Faso and other parts of Africa expose this narrative's hypocrisy. The West becomes alarmed when African countries freely select their allies without financial constraints or coercion. Why? For it reveals that the supposed stability they provided to the continent was never ever there. It served as a veil for authority. Africa's ability to extract resources and maintain geopolitical dominance has always been more important to the West than its actual independence. The United States' worry and France's panic. It all stems from the knowledge that they are running out of time to dictate conditions to Africa. That process is being accelerated by Russia's increasing influence, and the West is just not able to tolerate it. Russia has been swiftly vilified by Western media, which has characterized Moscow as an aggressor in Africa. Let's be honest though, the West's response to losing power is the only act of aggression here. The foundation of Russia's alliances with African countries such as Burkina Faso is mutual gain rather than exploitation. These countries no longer want to have their destinies, their economy, or their militaries dictated to them. They look to Russia for economic collaboration, security, and above all respect. And the West is unable to provide that. Because the West has never been willing to give up control, which is required in order to show respect. The point made by the West is absurd. According to them, Russia is there to cause instability in Africa and plunge the continent into anarchy. Let's examine the facts though. The US and France in particular have done nothing except contribute to instability in Africa. Their alleged aid initiatives have left economies in ruins due to debt. Their political manipulation has left nations weak and divided, and their military operations have solidified bloodshed, as the West has always denied the continent true sovereignty and self-reliance. Russia's presence in Burkina Faso is providing a means of escaping that instability. Could a new era of African independence and self-determination be heralded by Russia's intervention in Burkina Faso? For far too long, colonialism, globalization, economic assistance, structural adjustment plans, and foreign dominance under false pretenses have eclipsed Africa's pursuit of true sovereignty. All of these were merely different leashes that were used to bind African countries to Western powers' interests. However, with Russia's intervention in Burkina Faso, we are seeing the beginnings of something that Africa has long desired and the West fears: true self-determination. More than just one leader was spared thanks to Ibrahim Traoré's survival following the aborted assassination attempt and the prompt Russian military response. It conveyed a message. African countries are no longer being used as pawns in Western geopolitical games. The issue of Russia's involvement in Burkina Faso is no longer incidental. It marks the start of a new era in African history, one in which countries such as Burkina Faso may proudly assert that their sovereignty cannot be compromised. Africa is now collaborating on its own terms, and Russia is a key player in this change. Do you believe that Africa can achieve full freedom with Russia? Is the West ever going to stop meddling? When will Africa be left alone by the West? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.